this is Christopher.
And this is Rob.
And we are from Blue Spire Consulting, and we are here today to talk to you about the new Windows Phone. Okay, so what is our agenda for today? First, we'd like to tell you a little bit about how to get the tools, give you the story about what development on the phone is all about. I'd like to show you what those tools actually are. Talk about the different types of applications you can build in as much as there's Silverlight and XNA. Then we'd like to tell you a little bit about the marketplace and how that works. I leave anything out there, Rob?
Sounds good. That last one's pretty important, the money.
The money, yes. Because that's probably why you're building applications for the phone. Okay, so the first thing you need to know is to go to developer.windowsphone.com. This is where you get the tools and where you register for the marketplace. So if you try to download the tools, you'll get a little executable. You run that, and it will install all kinds of things for you. And let's take a peek and see actually what those are. So here we have a fresh box where we've installed the Windows Phone tools. And as you can see here, we get a little emulator down here. And if we look, we see we have Microsoft Expression, Silverlight, Visual Studio 2010 Express, XNA, Game Studio, and the Windows Phone developer tools. Now, at this point, it might be important, I think, to make a distinction here. We're primarily going to be talking about building Silverlight applications for the phone versus XNA applications for the phone. Now, XNA is the game development platform for Microsoft, and it is an excellent choice for building games for the phone, for PC, and for Xbox. But we're not going to talk about that. Instead, we're going to talk about Silverlight.
So, Christopher, can you tell me maybe a little bit about each of these applications and the different things that we get installed here?
Sure. So the first thing we have is Expression. Now, Expression Blend is actually a tool geared more toward designers, although I think it's a useful tool for developers to be familiar with as well. And this is a tool that lets us visually design our applications. It is, I guess to be exact, it is a user interface design tool. So here we are inside of Expression Blend. You'll notice this is a version specifically for the phone. And even though Blend is a tool that is that targets Silverlight, WPF, this is only for the phone. The free version we get here is only for the phone. And if you want to target these other platforms, then you're going to have to actually upgrade from the free version to the real version of Blend. Just a couple of things to note about Blend is that it works with the same solution and project files that you use in Visual Studio. So you can create a project in Visual Studio and then open up in Blend and vice versa. Okay, let's see what else we have here. We also get the Visual Studio 2010 Express for Windows Phone, which is just like the Visual Studio you're probably used to working with, except for that this one is limited to building applications for the phone. And we can see here when we start up Visual Studio that we get a lot of guidance already. I mean, Microsoft is very interested in us making excellent applications for the phone because, hey, it sells their product. Okay, what else do we get down here? We see the XNA Game Studio. And this is not really going to be used in the series that we're currently working on, but this is a little bit of documentation and ways to publish games. Of course, you create your XNA projects from inside Visual Studio, not from here. But again, we're not going to be talking about this in this series. So under the Windows Phone Developer Tools, we have Application Deployment, which is a little utility for copying our applications to our actual physical phones. There is the emulator, which is launched from Visual Studio as well whenever we are debugging a project.
And one important thing to note about that is that it will not run inside of a virtual machine. So for example, right now we're showing you these samples in a VM. The emulator itself is a VM and it will not function correctly.
So the final tool here, the Windows Phone Developer Registration, is a tool for registering your physical devices with Microsoft so that you can deploy your application to them. Now there is a limited number, and we'll talk about that more in detail when we get to the Marketplace episode.
So I see that there are these custom versions of Blend and Visual Studio that are free. Well, what if I already have VS Pro installed, for example?
Excellent question. So the installer that we downloaded to install these applications is actually a smart installer. If you don't have anything installed, it's going to download about, I think, 420 or so megabytes of applications. But if you already have some of these things downloaded, it will actually not download them again if they're installed. And if you have a version of Visual Studio, such as Pro or Ultimate or whatever, it will just add the necessary files to your current version of Visual Studio, and you don't have to use the Express version at all. Okay, so earlier we made the distinction that we're going to be talking about Silverlight on the Windows Phone as opposed to XNA on the Windows Phone. But what does that really mean? I mean, what is Silverlight to begin with?
So Silverlight is a rich media and graphics platform for building applications. It's vector-based, it's hardware accelerated. It's very similar to Flash in some ways, but being developed by Microsoft and geared towards .NET developers, you can write your applications with C#, and you can design your user interfaces using a declarative markup language called XAML, which is more or less a dialect of XML.
So if I write a Silverlight application for the web that runs in a browser, is that going to run on my phone as well?
It depends. The browser version of Silverlight right now is at version 4, and the phone is based on a build of Silverlight from version 3. The phone version has a few features that have been removed for more or less for time's sake in terms of getting the release out. But it also has a few features that have been added as well. So there's a good chance that what you've been working on for the browser would run on the phone, but it would probably need some reworking and some customizations. Now, there's also another question, of course, of whether you should try that, and probably not, but mainly for the reason that the phone is really a very specific form factor, and to provide the best user experience, you really want to design from the phone to begin with.
So now, why would I choose to build my application Silverlight for the phone as opposed to XNA?
Well, these two different paths that you can go down for building phone apps are really tailored to slightly different scenarios. So XNA is basically a graphics API, a 3D hardware accelerated graphics API, while Silverlight is more of an application framework. Now, you can build games with Silverlight, but you're not going to be able to build the high-performance 3D games that you would build with XNA. At the same time, you could also build applications with XNA, but you're going to have a lot more work to do trying to put infrastructure in place, whereas if you went with Silverlight, you would start out of the box with things like buttons and text boxes and list boxes and those sorts of things. So generally speaking, if you want games, you would go with XNA. And if you want other types of applications, you'd go with Silverlight, although it can be one way or the other, just depending on your requirements.
So after you build your application for the new Windows Phone, you're going to want to sell it, or at least install it and play with it, I guess. But probably you're going to want to sell it, I imagine. So in order to do that, you'll have to publish your application to the marketplace. So if you go again to the developer.windowsphone.com, you can register for the marketplace. And the registration process currently is pretty straightforward. I would like to point out that it is not free. You have to pay $100 per year unless you are a student and part of the DreamSpark program. And there are certain restrictions too. For example, you will have to have your application adhere to the certification requirements. And that is available as a PDF. And you want to read through this to make sure that your application actually meets all these requirements. And these requirements deal with things like being consistent look and feel with the other applications. Also things like being safe, not misleading users. There's a rigorous process the applications go through before they are approved for the marketplace.
So one thing I like to point out is that if you are building enterprise applications, there's not really an outlet for those apps right now. This is basically a consumer phone, and so consumer-oriented applications, and that's sort of the way the marketplace is set up. In the future, I suspect that that's going to be changing, but right now, everything that you're seeing here is oriented towards a consumer-based phone.
So that about wraps up our very brief introduction to what the phone is all about. I'd like to tell you a little bit more about what you can expect from the next episode and from the remainder of the series. In the very next episode, we're going to walk you through creating a real functioning application that you could publish to your phone for browsing through the Tekpub videos that are available. In future episodes, we're going to talk about the design guidelines, really what you're going to need to do to get your application certified. We're going to talk about some specifics of the phone in terms of like the life cycle that an application has on the phone. What happens when a phone call comes in while your application is running. We're also going to talk about things like the trial API to help you monetize your application, so you can give the user a trial version of your application and later allow them to upgrade that to the full production.